What are downtime actions, and how should you implement them? Your party wants to have their characters do things that will take a significant amount of in-play time, and narrating through each step of the process would take the same amount of out-of-game time. So when is it a good idea to consider doing downtimes instead of running whole games to resolve what they're trying to do? We answer all these questions and more tonight on the Playing God podcast. I'm your host, Nick Logie, and with me in the Matrix is Xander. Can I put bacon on this? Nolan.
Hey, man.
Let's begin with what needs to be addressed before anything else. What exactly are downtime actions?
Well, they are something for you to put bacon on. No, I'm kidding.
I could
Downtime
dedicate a
actions.
whole game to that. Try me. I wrote an entire book about an old man getting out of bed. Step up.
Downtime actions are scenes in which your characters are doing things at a normal rate for in-game play, but at an accelerated rate out of play. A good example is you go to a shop, you buy some stuff. All right, look through that. We're going to handle this over here while you're doing that. Then when they're done, they're done. Versus you walk up to a shop. There's a wooden sign swinging in front of the door that reads, "In and tackle." You walk in, you see a bearded, you get the idea. So
Yeah, one thing leads to another, and you're dedicating a whole game to shopping.
a whole game to shopping, which is fun. Totally do
It
that
can be fun.
sometimes. Can be very fun.
We've
We've
done
done
it.
that a lot. A lot. I like it. It's really fun.
Think movies when you're thinking of downtimes. I'm thinking specifically of the director Edgar Wright, notable for like Simon Pegg movies like Shaun of the Dead, and I think like all of the ones he's in. But so think of those scenes, the transition scenes with all the jump cuts and the zooming. Like what they're showing is actually really boring if it wasn't filmed that way. Like Simon Pegg's brushing his teeth. As just a static image, that you'd be like, why? But as a jump cut thing, it's like it establishes that he did it. He used the toilet. He cooked dinner. He bought a plant, and like whatever else he did. And it does all of this, takes care of all this mundane, boring stuff in a relatively exciting way in only a few seconds. That's basically what a downtime is. It's like if somebody says, "We need to go get the stash from under the shed in the backyard," instead of having an entire scene where they dig up the stash, unless that's part of your thrilling plot, then just jump cut to like they have the bag, they slam it on the table, and like the tools spill out or the drugs or whatever it is that they dug up.
Yeah. A good example of that is in the movies when. Okay, let's say, for example, the movie Death Sentence. When Kevin Bacon's character, mild-mannered executive guy, his son dies, and he's encountered this gang, and then there's this scene where he shaved his head, and now he's like getting used to using a gun. He's making his own ammunition. That's a significant amount of time that's occurred. Like, it takes a long time to get proficient with these things, but you're seeing it all in like a 2-3 minute set, and that is an expression that time is passing, and these are the things that's happening, but only in flash frames. That's one of the easiest ways to kind of put it in. You can use anything for a downtime action.
Yeah, it's a way to expedite the stuff that in your game specifically needs the expediting. So if your entire game is a premise of like a post-apocalyptic thing, and zombies are coming at you, and you got to prepare for that, then maybe you would have a game where that is dedicated to making the bullets and like putting up boards and like tactically laying out traps and doing all that. But if you need to do all that and there's no reason for it to be an entire scene, and it could encompass any amount of time. So maybe instead of like something threatening like zombies, your character needs to learn a new language. Now, are you going to sit there and roleplay learning a new language? Because if you are, why don't you just actually learn a new language and just pretend you're being your character learning, I don't know, Spanish, Mandarin? Instead, with downtime actions, you could just say, "I want my character to be learning Dwarvish for so I can train in this and understand like half of my party members, and we're about to go um, into the Dwarven Kingdom, so I should probably know how to do this." So
Yeah.
instead of role playing through each and every session of being taught, you basically just sum up. You find a teacher, you dedicate most of your time to learning this new skill. This much time passes, and along with the other characters who are probably doing different stuff than learning Dwarvish, maybe your dwarf already knows it, and he instead wants to go find the components to like mine the components to make a cool axe. You're not going to role
Yeah.
play him hitting a wall forever. You're going to just sum it up, skip to the part where they arrive at the Dwarvish Kingdom, and like maybe now is when you pick up. It's like, okay, there's this watchtower
Yeah.
that's keeping a lookout for trespassers or immigrants, and you approach, and then the dwarf guy who's like paying attention to all this like hollers at you. Since you've studied Dwarven and you know how to speak it now, you can understand him without having to like get any translations or anything like that. Um, so you get right to the real meat of the game.
Yeah. And a another example of let's say learning a language, but you're traveling through the forest, and you're following this pathway, and you're on your way to the next kingdom, and you wanted to learn the language while you're traveling. The game takes place when you're up and about, and let's say you find a cave, and you're going through the cave, and you're investigating these old ruins and some cave markings and things like that on the walls. But when you get back to camp and you're setting up your tent, you light your fire. This is what's happening while your characters are taking a long rest. You're sitting there poring over these books that you picked up in the last town. And so they can happen 10, 15 times in a given session. It is just knowing and understanding that a downtime action is what's happening in the background, and it is happening to make the passage of time for in-play things go more smoothly.
Xander, I
So that
just thought of a good example that encompasses both of those things in the same show. Star
okay,
Trek. So, some episodes, the ship arrives on a planet and they do whatever. But other episodes, it's all about the ship arriving. So, in
yes,
the first example, the downtime is whatever happened on the ship getting up to the planet, whether it was just routine Starfleet nonsense or whatever. But in the second example, the the quote same downtime section is actually when the whole game's taking place. You got tribbles aboard. Oh wait, that's a good episode because the first part of that was basically a downtime action, and then the rest of the episode was, oh god, what are these furry things?
yeah, yeah. The trouble with tribbles, man. But so when using a downtime versus actually having the game be what it's about, there's a couple of questions that you need to ask yourself. The first is, does this action that the player is taking provide any interesting narrative to the story? If the answer is no, it can be summed up in a downtime action. If the answer is yes, like you want to introduce a new NPC who happens to be the shopkeeper here and has plot for them, then sure,
Hmm.
do the shopping montage as an in-play thing.
I actually
Uh,
generally apply that rule also to dice rolls when I'm
oh
calling for
yes,
them. So if somebody wants to do an action that there's no consequence or no significance to it, they auto succeed. They don't have to say I'm taking 10 or taking 20. They're just like whatever, you could do this thing. But if it's like I'm trying to talk this guy down off a ledge, then even though there's no threat directly to your character, then the actual roll itself has a consequence. So I apply that same logic to the physical act of rolling dice.
absolutely. And knowing and understanding when to do these things, it comes naturally as a GM with a bit of experience. But a good means by which to measure this is to always ask yourself, can this be summed up, or does this have to be explained? So the summed up is the downtime. The explained is the full game session dedicated to, well, we're shopping for this and then that, and da 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 da. Now, a downtime action can also be the entirety of a game session, because you might have, an expansive time that has to occur before a given plot point to the next game, but it's 6 months.
Right.
So what are they
You get
doing
like
in those six
6+
months?
months, there's a lot that can happen. Think of how much happened in your life over the last 6 months.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
oh man, if you had to go through all of that in play, then well, you're just another person at that point.
yeah, you're just a dude. So uh, keeping in keeping with what a downtime action is, how often out of play should you implement the downtime action? My opinion is that when the situation calls for a downtime action, uh, then you should implement one. But on an out of play level, these are things that your characters are doing in the space between your game sessions. Say your character is at this given game session, and you just finish up a big bad thing, right? You just killed the big bad guy for this chapter of the story, and you guys are going to be making your way all the way back to where you started from. Now, the next game session is going to take place where you started your journey in the first place, back in the main city. It's away from the lair, but it took you 5, 6 game sessions and a traveling of 2 months to get there. So what happens in that time? You can ask for your players out of play to type up or write out a given section. It's like, all right, what are you doing in these 2 months as time is progressing
Hmm.
between these two game sessions? And that's an out of play on a completely out of play level.
That's right. And speaking
So
of out of play level, I actually want to bring up Shadowrun as an example for this because in the Shadowrun game that I ran for a good long time, each week that passed out of play also passed in play. But they weren't playing on a day-by-day basis. That we'd only play Mondays. So in play, their characters would actually meet up on Monday or whatever day of the week it is. But then when we got to the next game, an actual week had passed in play. So basically, between the game on an out of play and in play level, the players were thinking about what their characters were doing, and then they told me what they wanted to do, and like what they were going to go about, like how they were going to go about doing that. So that way, when we got to the beginning of the game on that next Monday night, then first of all, I already had a lot of content to work with because if somebody wanted to do something really outlandish, then hey, maybe that's the plot for the game tonight. Uh, but otherwise, it's like if you have a job in 2 weeks that you have to do, then should go about prepping on how you're going to do that job. The, I wish this
yeah,
translated in con or like from an out of context level, but you have two
it really,
weeks. You remember when I told you how ominous that was and how
yeah.
badly you guys fucked up, wasting
Oh
your
yeah, we
time.
did. So much wasted time.
Like that could
Um,
actually put suspense like both in and out of play because if you say you have 2 weeks on an in play level, like the characters know something bad's gonna happen in 2 weeks, then how they prepare for that could change how that outcome it should change what the outcome is because it's a role playing game and not hallway simulator, but
yeah.
um
Um,
yeah how often is a good question. Personally, I don't have like set times for how often I do downtimes. It's really just when the story feels like it should have it.
yeah.
That's the same kind of way I treat random encounters. Does the random encounter benefit us in like a story in a fun sense? No, then why bother with it?
Yeah. And another thing that you should ask yourself is how long should your downtimes last in play? Now, that question is loaded. The downtime should last as long as it needs to and no more. Because when you start getting into non restrictive downtime actions, one player can decide that they're going to take 6 months to do a thing, but the other characters are like, well, what can we do in 6 months? That's crazy, you know. So letting the downtimes be have a defined amount of time that as a GM, this is how long it's going to take to realistically accomplish this small out of play task.
It could also give people false expectations for when you actually return to the game. So if you have like a year that passed in play and they got to do all this shit basically uncontested for the most part, then once they get back into the game, there might be a bit of disappointment if you set that downtime to last too long. Then they might have an unrealistic idea of like how well they can succeed now that they do have to roll dice for various actions and have to really think about um, the strict details of what they are saying.
Mm. So just as long as is necessary. And when you do out of play downtime actions, but you have a certain set of time in play that's going to pass, a good rule of thumb is to make that time frame the amount of time you have between your meetings. So if you play once a month, make it a month. If you play once a week, make it a week. And that will give your players enough time to think about what they want to do, and it will have enough time in those spaces to really come up with good quality content to provide you as the GM. And remember, the downtime actions don't just apply to the player. What's your villain doing in this time? What are
That
they like getting
so
for?
Xander, one of my favorite things that I heard from the last time on Legends of Latier was when you guys were trying to debate where you were going to teleport to, because the question legitimately came up. It was just like, if it takes us a week, like 3 weeks to get here, what could Pharaoh Drex do in those 3 weeks?
Yep.
And so you were like, maybe let's not just, maybe actually let's use this teleport thing to go further than we were initially thinking, because we don't want to give the bad guy more time to do stuff.
Yeah, no. Like being aware that your other characters are doing things uh, included with that downtime. Like a perfect example of this is after the climax of the first act of Legends of Latier, the characters who were left before the next play session was slated to happen was Kenton and Mara, and it was just the two of us at that point. The other two players had dropped from the game for personal reasons, and so we had like what was it, 8 months worth of time.
Yep, it
So
was an
what are
eight
we
month
doing
downtime.
in those 8 month downtimes?
Now I
We
get now
had
real
an
quick
entire
side
game
note.
session.
I gave you the 8 months because they had just finished a major story arc. I think we had been playing for like 40, 30 games, something like that,
Oh yeah.
when you passed that story arc. So there was a lot they wanted to do in the background, which downtimes are great because of the abstract flow of time, where you could jump back and forth to do various things like at any given time, and like
Yeah.
even change what you're doing as like other people are coming up with new ideas, and things of that nature.
Yeah, so one of the things that my character and Jess's character had done was, well, it's time for us to celebrate. Like we just killed a demon and we closed a hell portal, and now the country has to do its rebuilding. So we spent some time doing the rebuilding, and then we spent some time going out and getting smashed drunk. And we woke up, in another dominance. We're
Oh,
teleporting all over
hold
the
on. No,
place.
we gotta save that for a little later when we get to the carousing table.
Oh, it's so much fun. But having a lot of time for your characters to just get into some stuff and do some mundane things, and hold as an entire game session after a major story arc is just finished, is a great way to do downtime actions as well. Let a lot of time pass, let some progression for the story, and a little bit more fluff added to both your characters and for the story itself.
That's right. There's a good
It
opportunity to do a lot of things. It's you since you have more free reign generally when you're doing downtime actions. You can add to the world. You could do things that maybe you wouldn't be able to really have time for when you're stuck with the party in an actual session. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the shit, I'm trying to remember what I was just thinking of, because one of the biggest things about a downtime action is shit, I cannot remember what it is. I just like massively had a brain fart. But I keep thinking of it every time you talk, but I can't interrupt you. So say some stuff, and then I'm going to interrupt you.
Okay. Just okay. So when you are beginning a downtime action that you're going to dedicate an entire game session to, let's say like Legends of Tier, it was 8 months in time. What kinds of things can your players
Oh,
get
that's it. I
accomplished?
got it. I figured it out. Okay, so it actually goes a little bit back to the out of play time. This is kind of a mixture of both. Um, this is also a way for your players to interact with your game and for you to interact with your game when you're not at the table. So if a
Oh,
player's
yes.
thinking about what they want to do, then they don't have to do that at the game table. They could jot notes down in bullet points. You could also be like, what's this NPC up to while, because I got my main story already taken care of. I got my map set up, but what's this NPC that they haven't seen for a while doing? What's he up to? So that game interaction can go a long way and really helps you make some quality content.
Oh, yeah.
That's the thing I was trying to remember. Jesus.
Now, when you sit down to let your players have a downtime game session or in some out of play time for downtimes, what kind of actions should you choose as a GM, and what kind of actions should your players be thinking about as well?
That's right.
Uh,
What I like to do is an approach for like kind of a mix, like what are the players doing and what are your guys, your NPCs doing, villains, good guys, whatever. I'm just the NPCs. I usually give the NPCs, as just a broad rule, the same amount of actions as the players took. So if, let's say in Latier, you guys did, I don't know, you took like a month to do 6 activities, we'll say. Then my NPCs, I'm not going to do this for each and every individual NPC because that'd be crazy hard and kind of boring, actually.
and really
But
time consuming.
really time consuming. But the NPCs basically have 6 actions that they can take. So maybe not always a 1-for-1 ratio. You kind of got to feel that one out based on how much the villain, for example, should be able to progress. Like maybe it's just not fun for whoever it is to be able to advance their plot off screen so drastically without player interaction. Even if that might be kind of a little gamey, where you're like, yeah, in real life this villain would dig in and really try to fuck with them. But in a game sense, that it's more fun if the players just get to do like 20 actions, the NPCs just do like 1 or 2 things. Like that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, but what kinds of actions are available to your players? Make it clear when the downtime begins that the amount of time they have that's going to pass and the kinds of things that they can do. Give them a couple of examples, and then you can decide whether or not you want to use like a restrictive list of things or just let your players run with it. Uh,
Typically,
and
downtimes are good for letting your players run with it, for the most part. But the type of actions, I think what Xander's getting at, are dictated by a lot of factors. So when you're trying to decide how big this downtime scale should be, do they need to stay within their group for some reason? If, for example, if you're holding out in a nuclear fallout shelter and you have 2 months of downtime while the fallout kind of goes away. I know that's a really short amount of time in real radiation, but for the game's sake, fuck it, it's 2 months. And
yeah,
like you have that 2 months, but that doesn't mean you get to like leave the shelter, do whatever the hell, then come back. You have to do all those downtime actions within the shelter, like pretty much
yeah,
around the other group of players. So even if you're not directly interacting with them on a character by character basis, if one of your downtime actions for some reason is you want to gorge yourself on the rations, it's probably going to be noticeable by the other people in the shelter when they get hungry. And
Yeah.
your fat ass is over there going like, what's up, guys? And they're like, oh, you.
We're gonna cut you open now. Um, but a scale can also ramp up. Like, for example, when Kenton and Mara were doing their downtime actions for about 8 months, we had been to a lot of places in play, and we could see and do a lot of things. We had
You had
fairly
access to
high
high
power
magic,
level.
so thus teleportation.
Yeah, we had access to high magic, so we could teleport and bloop around all over the map
So you
of
guys had
places that we'd been to.
that's right. You guys had an entire country, a massive, basically an entire continent that you could
Yeah,
interact with pretty much however you wanted for those 8 months. At that 8 months.
yeah. So we absolutely did. We ended up getting drunk and thrown in jail by our friend, who happened to be the leader of all the dwarves ever. It is, it's a lot of opportunity for some great moments, some memorable things, and the ability to go and like take care of like background business. One of the things that we did with ours was investigating the horde of a dragon whom we've already slayed. There's no threat there,
Yeah, you're
so
not. They're
it's
not. They weren't going to hunt the dragon. It was already dead. They just didn't know where he came from, so they had to figure out where his shit was.
yeah. So we ended up tracking it down, and part of our downtime actions was us journeying up there, gathering up all of the loot and the money that we had gotten, and using a huge portion of it to start the rebuilding of Latir after the demons invaded and killed a lot of people.
A lot of people.
Um, so like the scope of what kinds of things that they can do is based on their power level, what kind of resources they have access to.
And
Uh,
even finding that horde as like a time factor in play, because you didn't know where it was and you couldn't just teleport to it and do everything, you had to take a significant amount of in-play time, even though it was glossed over on an out-of-play level, to organize an expedition to actually haul that shit out of there, to
yeah,
climb the mountain, to find out where the entrance to the cave was, to distribute the wealth according to like however you guys did it. There was a lot involved, but instead of sitting there and actually doing the complex economics of a fantasy world, we're like, this is what happens as a broad sense.
yeah. And
And when
while that entire thing could have been done as an in-play game, it would have taken 5, maybe 6 game sessions to really go through all of this, and the amount of work that we would have had to put in as players uh, had already been done. Like the threats were gone. There's no reason to believe that that this entire cavern's full of more dragons that we're going to have to slay. In
mhm.
that case, it was just go through the process of figuring out where it was, getting some people out there, hauling all the crap out. Now you could run a game
If there was more
to do
stuff
that.
in if there was more stuff with the horde, like let's maybe there was like some baby dragons or like not so old and ancient dragons that are part of his family that were in there, then the downtime would be getting to the entrance, like up into that point, and
Yeah,
then we could have a game where you take on like the children of the dragon, but in this instance, that wouldn't have added anything substantial to the game. In fact, it would have been kind of confusing because dragons are rare in my setting. So if I would have put more shit in there, that would have been like, what?
yeah. So we made that entire thing part of our downtime actions, and it didn't feel like our characters weren't accomplished because we had the gold and we had some cool knickknacks and some magical items that came from that place, and it was the payoff for having fought the dragon in the first place. And the loot that we got from the dragon was just the things that was on him, his friggin' bones and his teeth and stuff. But his corpse was left to be studied by, the people who, uh, I can't the
The
The college.
Archaeology League.
Yeah, the archaeology league. So
Well,
they
actually,
let.
so Xander, you actually did get something from his body, though. You took like the bones and the scales, and you made your badass bone brass knuckles and like the knife and all that stuff. Even though you
Yeah,
couldn't like instantly make it on the spot, like you got the materials, and then as a downtime action, because you don't need to sit there and actually whittle the bone to the point where it looks like brass knuckles, you just kind of had those.
yeah. My character did those things, and then on top of that, had the dagger that was made from his tooth tip, enchanted, so that it
And
would,
that
you
and
know,
the
be
enchantment,
magical.
even though the when the enchantment was actually happening was kind of fast forwarded, like finding the people who could enchant it and do all that work, that was an in
Yeah,
play thing because that's significant. But if you have a mage in every town who could just be like, fuck it, +1 dagger, I'm gonna throw it on the ground because it's practice at this point, then like maybe you could have just used a downtime to enchant some stuff like that. But since enchantment of magical weapons is also a rarity in my setting, then that would have been equally weird if you and I would just been like, yeah, you get it enchanted, whatever, and then we move on.
yeah. So, what is important to your game should determine the scope of the things that they can do. Like, do you dedicate the entire 6 months to tracking down a wizard that has the power level to do these things that you need to have done before you begin the next league of adventure? Is definitely something that can be glossed over as a downtime, but the amount of time it takes should definitely be indicative of your setting and how rare or how common certain things are.
Now,
A
if
good
you're not,
example of
oh,
that,
sorry.
is when characters decide they want to create or utilize a structure within your game. We'll get to management of all that
Well,
stuff,
I mean,
but
we're kind of getting into that now because what I was bringing up is if you're having problems like trying to guide the players to do something, or if they're not sure what they want to do during this downtime, but they kind of need to do something because otherwise it's just wasted in play time. But it does need, the downtime still needs to happen. Like you can't just play through the 20-day trek across the plains. Um, then create an itemized list of what they can do. This is the
yep,
restrictive list that Xander mentioned earlier. There are like in the actual rules for like Dungeons and Dragons and other games, like either tables or lists or ideas that you can use for the specific game. If you could also just write your own, like maybe players can redecorate castle. Uh,
yeah,
Players can go shopping. Players can do research at the library for whatever they want. Like things like that. If you just have that as a list, hand that to the players, gives them ideas, makes it easier on you, and it doesn't throw any curveballs at you.
yeah. But if you let your players run with it, this is where your players that are particularly creative and they have like constant back burning ideas that are always simmering through their head. Because believe me, as a DM, you're gonna run into players like that, and when you do, cherish them because they're hard to DM for, but they're also a lot of fun. So letting the right players run with certain scenarios and stuff like that is sometimes just as good as creating the lists and things like that. A good one for shorter downtime actions is things like the carousing table in the Dungeon Master's Guide for Fifth Edition. It's it's the span of a night where they've gone out drinking. And they get drunk, they gamble, they make some money, they lose some money, they end up being winning the deed to an entire noble estate, which happened once, and they get a title and like land associated with that. So
So
there's things at your disposal.
one of the fun things about the carousing table is because you roll on it and you don't just pick what you do, and you can also like extend the time if it's more than just the night or whatever. But
Yeah,
whatever you roll, like you read that and if it's like a challenging thing, you're like, how do I apply this to my characters? And here's how I applied one of the DMG carousing things. And it was a mixture of using the table and just freeform downtime actions to make an interesting result. And that was the example that Xander brought out earlier where Mara and Kenton got arrested. So the downtime, they actually just rolled on the carousing table. But it said they got arrested, and I was like, how the fuck? Because they're not bad people. They're not going to go out and do, like... They're not just going to beat up an old man on the street or something like that. So what could they get arrested for? So I thought about it, and we had a hangover type situation where I didn't tell them anything, but then they woke up in a jail cell, and they're like, how did we get here? So then they went and uncovered that the normally virtuous monk, who is also a politician, Xander, decided that he was going to go, while he was drunk as balls, he was going to teleport across the continent and go into a religious cathedral and practice his kung fu by breaking pews, like candlesticks, the frickin' pedestals, whatever it was. And Mara, being the bard, came up behind him and used mending on all those objects, so that way they were trying to not get in trouble, but they still busted into a church and broke the fuck out of it. So like there were ramifications. You don't get away with it just because you fixed it afterwards. So they ended up in jail and they had to backtrack with like, oh, what did we do?
Oh crap! Then the king of the dwarves is like,
guys.
No, guys, I've got to keep you in here for a couple of days until I can figure out how the fuck to smooth this over.
You weren't even in my dominance. How did you come in here and break stuff?
Like, how the fuck? It's like, last I heard you were in the freaking elven dominance. How did you get here? Like,
you were halfway across the world. How the fuck?
Fuck. Oh, we teleported. What? You could do that? Apparently so.
And it would have been a much bigger deal if you weren't already friends with the king, but since you were, kind of helped expedite the whole trial process.
Yeah.
The law and the
just
order
got let go. Like the leader of all of the dominances were like hardened warriors or like great politicians, were like close personal acquaintances. Like I could walk up to the king of the entire dwarven people that number in the hundreds of thousands and just slap him on the arm and buy him a drink. You know, like it's that. Like I didn't know, about his kids and stuff like that, but I knew the guy well enough that I could, see him in a social setting. So that kind of got us out of trouble pretty quickly.
But also, it mostly just directed how the downtime action went, because a more maybe sinister GM would have seen you've gotten arrested, and maybe that's the whole campaign now. Maybe you fucked up so bad during a downtime that your whole campaign is now the Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, how do you get out? Because, the dude doesn't like you, and the king is very upset with, the things that you've done. What are you going to do now there, buddy? So there's a lot of options for using that to your advantage.
So when you're using a more restrictive list, then make it vague. Don't have super specific options like go visit this particular guy at this particular place. Just like maybe something simple like an old friend wanders into town, or the guy you shaft, somebody in your past who doesn't like you has come to mess with you.
Yeah.
So you can figure out the specifics once you get the inspiration.
Yeah, but another thing that you can use downtime actions for, and one of the things that I like to do as a GM, I like to give my players a structure, a place that they can continue to go to in a realistic manner where this is their home. This is where they're from. They can get messages there. They can, talk to people that they're familiar with. This is where you can create some meaningful NPCs that you're going to have a lot of interaction with. But accompanied by that is the downtime actions of managing that place. Like, is there a business there? Do they manage this land? Do they have, family?
Yeah, what do they do? So one of the things that tie in both the is this a business and a place that they can return to, in Shadowrun, it was the fucking Badger. What was it?
Dragon's Den.
Yeah,
The Badger Hole
Badger Hole,
became the
that's it.
Dragon.
So the business was initially called the Badger Hole, owned by an NPC that everybody liked, and it was a frequent hangout for the Shadowrunners where they got their jobs, etc. Eventually, down the line, a player actually ended up buying that establishment and renaming it the Dragon's Den, pimping it out like it was a much more suave environment, whereas before half the sign was sparking and was definitely a fire hazard. Now it was like a cool AR holographic animated sign that really welcomed new business as opposed to the sketchiest people imaginable.
Yeah, and the character whom bought that business had to manage it on an out of play level, and downtime actions are really good for that. One of the things that it does is it gives the player a sense of accomplishment that isn't just the journey that they're on. They're making real changes to your story and adding content that is completely their own. They get to own this bakery, and they yeah, have like 4 or 5 people that work for them. And yeah, sure, a lot of the time they're out just kind of, dealing with the adventures and letting their bakery run in the sideline. But when they get home, they've got, a satchel full of gold. That's the profits for the month. But there's also a problem. They need a new bakehouse because the old one burned down. And, like it creates some in-play options
Or
for.
maybe they didn't they didn't pay the guard for the month that they were gone, and they were like, fuck, and they came back and like their stores have been raided because
Yeah.
like nobody was there to stop the thieves, and it was pretty obvious no one was guarding the place. So now you gotta buy back your stock or something like that. I would generally recommend not getting too detailed on the management side of it, because at some point you're getting into real world like math and stuff like that, which is if you want to do that, fine. But I'm not coming to a game to do taxes, nor am I coming to a game to do what a lot of my players want to do in any semi-modern setting that I have, which is play the fucking stock market. Like, I'm not making up the whole stock market so that your ass could go on there and exploit it. It's like, I'm not doing that. The stock market's hard enough to keep track of in real life. I'm not trying to make a simulated one in like a world that doesn't exist. So,
But if you want to, I have
then don't
actually
invite me to that table.
I've actually found online where, as part of the downtime actions, you can send your player a link to a virtual stock market that you just plug in like 5 or 10 numbers to, and you set a frequency, and it will rise and crash and climb and change over time, but you can speed that time up, and it's a completely virtual thing, and your players can use that to either gain or lose a lot of fucking money.
Xander, do you have this link on you? Can we link that in the description?
I do not have the link on me as of current, but I can do some research.
Well, we're gonna find
on.
it. We're gonna put it in the description.
Yeah,
I actually could use
cool
this
tool.
thing for when somebody wants to do that, and I actually feel like obliging them. It's not often.
Yeah, not often at all. I think Dylan wanted to play.
No, it wasn't him.
Market.
It was. Oh my god! It was Skylar. He wanted to play the stock market.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, but there's yeah.
Oh my god, it was too much.
Yeah. To give you some ideas about this, it's a teaching tool for school economics in high school, and it's really simple, and it's all online. You can just play with it and manage it. If you want to just Google it, we'll find one and link it in the description of this video.
I'm also going to link the exact page number for the carousing table in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's page 127, but I'm going to have that listed because when I just Googled what page was that on, I couldn't find the answer, which I was really surprised about. So I actually had to go in the book and, yeah, for real. It was there was a lot of like homebrewed like additions to the list, but it wouldn't just tell me what the basic list was. Like there was like Reddit posts. It's just like, hey, look at all these things you could do. And instead of just like, I just want to know what the page is so I can see what it is.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. Yeah, so whether or not your characters have land to manage, businesses, there's a completely separate episode that we can do about creating a meaningful place for your players to have. But that'll be at a later date. Another big one is, do your characters have family? In these downtimes, you know, a realistic person is going to want to go and see the people that they've been away from for months and maybe even years at a time. A really
Shit,
good example of that
even
is
Batman has
Mara.
Alfred.
Yeah, yeah. Even Batman's got Alfred. Like Mara has her mom and the owner of the place where they both live and where we initially brought her on to the journey from. And so this place, the Grinning Fox, is an iconic location to the city of Moonlight Harbor, where Mara's character or where Jess's character is from. And every opportunity we get, we go back there and we talk to her mom and we get more of the suspiciously fresh cake.
And this isn't something that I made up at all. Like it's in my game. It's in my city of Moonlight Harbor. But everything from the design of the establishment to what NPCs are inside of it to how it is designed internally, to like even like its own backstory and history. None of that was me. That was
Yeah,
all Jess.
all created by our player by Nick's player Jess, and letting your players create something like that as a means of part of their backstory is an amazing thing, because they'll think of doing things with their own kind of spin on it that might not even occur to you. Like my character being the son of one of the delegate members for the council that ran Latier. uh, Nick had never planned on creating such a fleshed out place, but instead, the Parafith is a real intangible place that I helped him come up with, and is a location that we continually keep going back to several points in time during the game. And how it looks and what it feels like is all a creation based between me and Nick. And so uh, letting your players have some real, like something that they've created to add to your story is a really good idea, especially in the beginning, like with backstories and things like that.
It gives
And
you
it'll
more to
create a
work
lot
with
of
in your
meaning.
world, and
Oh,
it gives
absolutely.
more investment to the players. Uh, but aside from like physical, or I guess imaginary physical structures, um, like a big part of downtimes that I've seen in a lot of my games that I do myself when I'm playing characters is go visit people, go talk to your friends, go to a business meeting with like one character I had in Shadowrun. He knew the CEO of Ares Corporation, so I, I had my downtime is literally just go hang out with that guy. I didn't want anything from him. We hung out on a yacht and drank beers. Like, in play, nothing of substantial progress happened. But, like, if you treat the game world, not exactly, but closer like you would in the real world, then you would know you got go visit grandma at her house. Maybe grandma's got plot for you. Who knows? Uh, or maybe if your characters have like children or something, then they need to rear those children. Like there's all sorts of things that you have to do. One of the best examples I've seen is actually kind of a game that I've recently picked up and started playing in. I haven't GM'd at all, so I don't know how it is from that angle. But it's a game called Red Markets. It is one of those zombie post-apocalyptic games, um, but the focus is more on the survival and like collectively building the world rather than like fighting zombies. So one of the key things of the mechanics of this game is upkeep. So after each job that you do, the items that you hold and the dependents that you add as part of the character creation process, you got to spend the your earnings, which is called bounty, like that you earned in play to to maintain that. So, let's see, your gun needs cleaning and you need more ammo. It costs like one bounty to upkeep or something like that. But in a game where you are only averaging about maybe 8 to 16 bounty a mission, like that's one of your bounty already gone. Let's say you have a dependent. You have an invalid uncle who can't go out and help you, do any of these missions because maybe a zombie bit him in the leg and they had to amputate it super fast or else he would turn vector and, spread the disease further. He can't do anything, but you still have to take care of him. He's your uncle. So you spend like a couple bounty, feeding him, giving him a shelter, etc., etc. And so that comes out of your profits. Now, you don't want to ditch these people because, if you ditch your family, then you get to be completely alone in a terrible place where you're doing nothing but going insane because your life is nothing but like raiders and zombies and like surviving, and you just can't take it. Like the stress just goes out of control. And in red markets, those are mechanics. All of those things I just described are mechanics. In other games, you're not going to probably get hard mechanics like that. So if maybe Mara just for some reason decided to ignore her mother for 2 years, there's nothing like mechanically that really happens, but that's a really shitty thing to do and play. So
Yeah, I think she actually like does a sending message to her every once in a while just to check in and see how she's doing.
she does. It's a great role play thing. Like, so if you're looking at it from a strict game perspective, that's not a good idea. She's blowing a level, what is that, 1 or 2 spell to basically just check in on an NPC. But to people like me and Xander who revel in the storytelling aspect of any game that we play, those little things make a huge difference. It fleshes out the world. It gives like the whole thing. It makes it feel 3D, like it's actually there in some respects.
And it gives your characters something to cling to that's not just the adventure. It's something that they brought into your world, and it means something to them. And when things mean something to your players, and your players have a sense of investment into your game, it will make your game that much better. Like, they will want to come to the table every single session. Like, they will not be able to wait until the next game because they know that, the things that they have done and the people that they have influenced are here, and they could contact them, and they can interact with this world in a real, tangible way that they affected and that they helped create. And that kind of investment is long in the making, and it's one of the best things about Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games that you can't really get from a video game. That sense of purpose and action that has changed the world. And as a GM, you want to give your players that, because that is the best tool to get your players invested in, well, you. This is the story that you're telling, but you're telling it for them. And how they interact with your world is what keeps them coming back. So keeping that as in the forefront of your mind is very, very important.
Yeah, it's not just about progressing, getting to the next piece of content. It's having your players even create NPCs or just check in on them or whatever they're gonna do. That gives you two things. One, it gives you what Xander just says, which is player investment. And second, it helps you as a GM embody that NPC better. So if Mara had told me that she has a mother, like I'd have nothing to go off of on that. Like, yeah, sure, everybody has a mother. Like, what am I supposed to do? But since she like described like what she was like, and like what her job is at the Grinning Fox and everything like that, I was able to more easily slide into that role when it actually came to speaking as Mara's mother. But however you choose to handle downtimes, it should be fun for the whole table and a vehicle for expediency to resolve matters and actions that don't need entire sessions built around them. We hope that we've given you some good food for thought to consider during your downtime action until we meet again next time on the Playing God Podcast.
Later, man.
Until next time.